The Mother Goose Experience. Part 1. A lucky break. A gift of a part. It is difficult to write this account objectively, knowing what I know now, and the subsequent book on the life of John Nathan Turner that was published soon after his death. And in many ways it was very good I didn't know half what was going on under my very nose, or it wouldn't have done much for my confidence with such a critical role to pull off. But as I am writing this account in retrospect, I will be referring back to that book to mirror my experiences.
It was a brand new theatre, says Roden, only open a couple of months, and he had frustrations with that, which weren't his fault. John wasn't used to working without screaming and shouting at people, but saying that, he could be incredibly nurturing and mentoring as well. Given the commercial success of Aladdin, it was unsurprising that the council wanted more of the same the following year. Despite his misgivings, Roden invited John back, and this time the production was Mother Goose.
If someone had told me 20 years ago that I'd be playing Panto Dame, I'd have probably thought they were mad. This stems from two reasons. A, before I entered the profession, I had never seen a professional pantomime, bigger for me, as I'd had the chance to see some of the great dames when I was at school, including Terry Scott, Arthur Askey and Jack Tripp, and stupidly never went. B, when I made my professional panto debut, I thought my future lay in playing pantomime villain, which I still enjoy doing, and have since played Demon King, Abanazar, Wicked Witch and Sheriff of Nottingham. However, the year after I played villain in Robin Hood at Gray's, I was very miscast as comic at Middlesbrough, followed by Cannock the following year, for which I received a very scathing review from the stage saying it was all too clear that David Rumelle was acting the role of Simple Simon. In a way, I agreed with them. In order to play comic, you need to have that street credibility that appeals to the kids and communicate on their level. The comic is there for the kids, whereas the dame is there to bridge the gap between the kids and the adults. During the 2 years I played comic, I worked with a wonderful northern comedian, Ian Moore, with whom I worked very well, as we were never vying for laughs. In fact, I was happy to learn from him. He said during our second year that he wouldn't be at all surprised if I didn't play dame in later years. I missed a year in the Panto cycle when I did a children's show at the Midland Arts Centre, Arabian Nights, which was a collection of ethnic folk tales, not so much pantomime as parable. Then, local entertainer and drag performer David Raven, aka Maisie Trolette, mentioned that the previous year he had worked as dame at the Elgiva Theatre, Chesham, for John Nathan Turner, the last producer of the old-style Doctor Who as we knew it. He advised dropping my CV up to him, but it was a tenuous inquiry as I'd never played dame before and still didn't have any of my own costumes, which was really a prerequisite. Still, it was worth a try. Then, as luck would have it, I mentioned all this to my two friends, the two Johns from Worthing, who were instrumental in my meeting my partner Michael and thus moving to Brighton. Apparently John Griffiths had trained and worked with John Nathan Turner at the BBC, and he said he would phone John and make a personal recommendation. I subsequently received a phone call from JNT asking me to go to his house for an audition. The audition itself came just after I got back from a disastrous cabaret night in Swansea, and after receiving some bad news at home, it wasn't the ideal time. Because I was so stressed and angry, whatever, I walked into JNT's living room with not exactly a blasé attitude, but pretty much. John lived with his partner, ex-dancer Gary Downey, just outside Brighton. My partner Michael dropped me at their house that fateful Monday in late June. I am one of those people that always needs a character to hang a performance on. I suppose that shouldn't sound strange, as surely all acting is a character of some description, whatever it is, unless one is in a hit soap opera, of course. So when John gave me the script to read, I read it northern. John was very patient and calmly explained that Dame is like an alter ego, and that I should be playing it as if I'd gone to a party as myself and got slightly merry. That was the best note or piece of direction I have ever received. It made me instantly realise what the job entailed, and even though I don't think I delivered it that night, John had the faith in me to know that with my training and experience that I would rise to a challenge, and a challenge it certainly was going to be. The panto I was auditioning for was Mother Goose, and I couldn't have had a better role or start to my Dame career. It is the only panto that is written around the Dame, and was a great favourite of the late John Inman. The story is about a lovable but facially challenged old woman who is poor but loved by everyone. She then is sent a magical goose who lays golden eggs, and she becomes fabulously rich, and then she wants to be beautiful. So she parts with the goose to the demon vanity, bathes in the magic pool and becomes beautiful, but then realises the error of her ways and puts her case to the Queen of Gooseland that Priscilla the Goose will be best looked after by her. So within that scenario you have pathos, drama, slapstick, farce, everything you could wish for, as long as you have a good script. And being a much respected TV producer, John Nathan Turner gave me the best start and the best panto script I could ever have wished for. I didn't realise what a lucky break I had until just 2 years later when I came to play the role again at Wakefield, in a not so good production, bad script, bad direction, and the bad reconcoction of the story, but that's in a later chapter of this blog. John and Gary then talked about the show and asked if I could supply the costumes. I said I had a few, well, not strictly true at the time. I could borrow a few from David Raven, who had kindly offered to lend me them, and I would have some made and supply what was needed. They told me that they had one more person to meet by the end of the week, but would let me know as soon as possible. When I left John's house and met Michael, I was tingling with electricity. I just knew something was positive about all this, even though it would be arrogant to think I'd cracked it, excuse the pun, being a show about golden eggs. I received a call a few days later when I was in the Queen's Arms in Brighton, having an afternoon sherry. JNT, as he shall be called hereafter, and purely out of respect, rang me and said they would like me to play the role. When I think about it now, for what I was being asked to do and supply, the money wasn't wonderful. But these are chances in life that you don't turn down if you have any sense. I've also since learned that a very well-respected and excellent drag cabaret performer was my contender for the role, and John had chosen me purely because the role required an actor who could handle the gear changes in emotion, which I think is correct in panto. And here I must digress slightly. Panto Dame should never be drag. The audience must know it's a fella in a frock playing a kind lady. I agree with the maxim that drag queens don't make good dames, but that is a sweeping statement. I had dabbled on the drag scene and cut my teeth on the circuit, and without that experience I couldn't have handled taking over from George Logan in Cinderella the previous year at short notice, or of approaching the role in the way I was now going to have to. So maybe I was the exception that proves the rule, even though my dame, although high camp, is certainly not drag. So here I was with a lead panto role in my hands and not much time to prepare costumes and how to play it. Luckily, JNT got the script to me very quickly, but before that he gave me a breakdown of the entrances for the costumes, and I had a couple of meetings with him and Gary at their home. JNT was always brilliant with his choice of musical numbers, and I remember when I attended his funeral that everyone talked about his big finishes for his pantomimes. I have since acquired a few more of John's panto scripts, and they are beautifully written, all plot and character based, and full of brilliant material that still works today. Sadly, the majority of his scripts were given away by Gary to a local taxi driver in Brighton, who mounted the ghastly annual spectacle known as the Brighton Adult Panto, going against everything I have ever learnt and respected about the genre. But I'm off at a tangent again. Back to plot. On one of the first occasions I went down to see JNT and Gary, John played me some numbers that he'd chosen for me, one of which would be my opening number with the Juves, juvenile dancers, and another which would be my duet with the Goose, a strip section, made famous by John Inman, and then later a few bars as a poignant reminder of how Mother Goose loved her friend Priscilla the Goose. The numbers they'd chosen came from Darling Lily, a film starring Julie Andrews and of which I was vaguely aware of from seeing years ago with my parents. The numbers were perfect and so infectious to listen to that I wanted to sing them straight away. The only problem with singing numbers by such a diva is that Julie Andrews had such a big range in her time, well, a little reduced these days, that to transpose them down even by a semitone meant pushing the low notes into the basement. The same thing applies with songs by Barbra Streisand. They sound deceptively easy, but you try singing them. The other numbers, as a duet for Mother Goose and the Baron, and the Act 2 and Act 2 finale, was When You Smile from Annie Warbucks, a stage sequel to Annie. Again an infectious tune, which got the toes tapping every time. I loved the songs instantly, and I think it's pretty much the one and only time I've never had to have a say in my opening number. I didn't need to, it was all done for me. John had also caught on to the fact that I could do basic roller skating, and I mean basic, which I'd had to do many years before for an amateur production of Orpheus in the Underworld, and was one of the last productions I did before taking the vow of drama school chastity. I'd bought the skates from the production and had used them when I played comic a few years earlier. Again, John was brilliant in finding the title number from the roller skating musical The Rink for me and Peter Quince, who was to play the Squire, and who was also adept at rollerblading. We also discussed the makeup, and John told me about how John Inman always used to emphasise a gap in his front teeth to play the older Mother Goose. Now, due to the time constraints of changing from old and ugly to young and beautiful in a very short time, it meant that I couldn't do much on the makeup front to age up. John suggested I try and arrange a meeting with the late and great Jack Tripp, who also lived in Brighton, but I was reluctant. Even though I hadn't seen Jack perform, I had various videos of him being most adamant that you are too young to play Dame if you are under 40, as you don't look like a mum. I actually agree with that maxim, but being a character actor and constantly playing up to the age of 60 sometimes, I knew that part wouldn't be a problem for me under normal circumstances. But because we had so little time to do the transformation, we couldn't rely on old age makeup. I practiced various things over the next few weeks, huge eyelashes for the older character, the blacked out tooth, and even tried putting eyebrows on a flesh-coloured stocking top that could be removed quickly. When we came to shoot the photo for the brochure and flyer, I used the red wig scraped back and black makeup on my front tooth. The results were so ghastly that I had to Photoshop the image, but even so it looks as though my teeth have gone rotten. John gave me a breakdown of the entrances and we worked it out to be about 16. This was subsequently reduced to 15, but it was still a hefty wardrobe to supply. The only item that John said they would supply was the strip costume. As part of the boudoir scene, Mother Goose was going to perform what I now know as the John Inman washing line strip, in which various layers of clothing came off, and then he unwound a row of washing from around him, hangs it on the proscenium arch and declares, "Hasn't it been a shocking day for drying?" Having seen the video of John Inman doing it, the secret is wrapping lightweight silk items around the waist on a thin string and covering it up with a Velcro skirt. I've since had this made into a Widow Twankey outfit. But then I'm afraid it wasn't given much thought, and the result was a rather clumsy affair, which, looking back, I'm surprised John allowed to happen. As for the rest of the costumes, my friend Shirley, who'd been instrumental in getting me the job as company manager with Hinge and Bracket the year before, knew a hire company in Sutton that hired at a nominal fee. We went over and selected a few outfits that were of reasonable quality. David Raven lent me 3 or 4 outfits, including a beautiful pink glittery Mae West dress with big hips and a golden crinoline for the walk down. Another friend in Brighton lent me a huge white fur coat with a train, very Liberace, which subsequently was used for the walk down as well. The remaining 4 outfits were to be made by a local maker who, along with his partner, ran a hire drag outfitters, and from the word go, they were an absolute rip-off. I went round to their flat and carefully discussed the designs and selected materials, and when we came to pick them up, my heart sank. Apart from one outfit that I still use, the other 3 had been made from old curtain fabric that was so pale that the lights bleached the colours out on stage. I've only used 2 of them again. The other 2 I gave away to a friend in an amateur dramatics company. But there was nothing to be done, apart from compliment it with the other stuff. And funnily enough, the reviews all said how imaginative the costumes were. John got the script to me in good time, and apart from the opening spot, there was very little I added or changed. I didn't need to, it was such a good script. So with all prepared as much as it could be, I learnt the script and songs by heart and planned my delivery and awaited rehearsals. Part 2. On to Chesham. Michael and I took the costumes down to Chesham on the Friday prior to rehearsals. This also tied in neatly with the switching on of the Chesham town lights, such as they were for Christmas, and was a good way of publicising the panto as the cast walked through the streets of the marketplace. Michael and I arrived in good time and started unpacking. From the word go, John and Gary made it clear that they weren't paying for a dresser. Now, for every pantomime dame I've played since, all I've ever asked is for someone who is free and around at the time to help me with the changes. These have ranged from dancers to principals, in fact anyone who happens to be free. I've never demanded a dresser, but organised and politely asked those around me to help out. But John and Gary seemed almost fixated with the fact that I wasn't having any assistance. They also made no effort to arrange a quick change area for me and gave the only dressing room near the stage to Shibu Kapoor, ex-EastEnders who was playing Demoness Vanity. I've since worked with Shibu and she is a lovely lady. In fact, she couldn't understand why I wasn't given the room nearest the stage. That was that, and I just supposed I was going to have to live with it. The Elgiva Theatre Chesham is a typical council-built theatre with very little thought for the practicalities faced by the performers. For a start, there are only 3 dressing rooms, so for a big show with dancers, it creates a problem. When I was first there, the child dancers were installed under the stage. Nowadays, with licensing laws, they have to have one of the main rooms, which means that both male and female members of the cast have to share one room. Totally wrong, in my opinion, but again, I digress. Michael and I also met up with a lady I had arranged to stay with. She seemed very nice indeed, and stressed that her home wasn't a palace, but that I'd be very welcome. Now, normally theatrical landladies underestimate their homes, and the majority of landladies and digs I've stayed in have been wonderful. So there seemed no reason to vet her house before I was due to stay there for the first time the following Sunday night. I was soon to find the error of my ways. But first the other members of the cast began arriving for the light switching on, and they were all a lovely bunch. An ex-Brighton lad, Royce Euler, was playing my son Billy. A charming man, Peter Quince, was playing the squire, with whom I had a lot of scenes within the show. The 4 girls, Jodie, who was playing Jill, Natalie as Colin, Lucy as the fairy, and Emma as the goose, were all very friendly, as was Shibu Kapoor. In fact, to this day, they were one of the nicest companies I could wish for, being my first dame experience. The procession through the town was great fun, and the theatre manager David Rumelle seemed a charming man, along with every other member of the Elgiva staff, so all seemed well. With nothing else to do but wait for Monday's rehearsal, Michael and I enjoyed our last weekend together before all hell broke loose for the next 5 weeks, and 44 performances. I even squeezed in a night of hosting karaoke at a local pub in Brighton on the Saturday. I had a lift back down to Chesham on the Sunday with Jodie and her mother, as they lived just up the road near Saltdean, and I later discovered that JNT was their landlord. They dropped me off at the digs I'd booked, and then the horror struck. Fortunately, the landlady had gone to bed, but the house was cluttered to say the least, and when I saw the state of the bedroom, bare floors, panel missing in the door, broken window and dirty sheets, I knew I couldn't stay, or rather I had to for that first night. There was no other choice at 10 p.m. on a Sunday night. The next day I was up and dressed and out as soon as I could to try and contact someone at the theatre, or to try and speak to John and Gary to see what they could suggest. However, it was dear Peter Quince who came to my rescue. He was living opposite the theatre with a lovely lady called Ruth, who had a spare room. A phone call and I was booked in for the run, a very narrow escape, and something that did nothing for my nerves on that first day. Part 3. On to rehearsals. The rehearsals commenced with the luxury of the set in place for each scene. So we blocked and rehearsed, knowing exactly what our spacing was. A luxury indeed. John blocked the show while Gary choreographed the numbers downstairs. The local dancers had an apparently good reputation for tap. As a consequence, a good third of the show was choreographed as tap numbers. Unfortunately, the coordination of the tap shoes and the music was not ideal, and the result was a resounding clatter resembling a herd of elephants in a china shop. Gary Downey had been a top dancer in his day, alongside the likes of Danny LaRue and appearing in hit shows such as Sweet Charity, but as Peter Quint surmised, he'd never wanted to step out of the chorus. Now it seemed he'd become a rather embittered queen who enjoyed the power and the past glories. I worked with him under the stage on my dance duet with Priscilla the Goose. I'll give you 3 guesses. Even without saying a word or moving a foot, Gary pounced on me, proclaiming, "This isn't one of the huge dance numbers." Interestingly, I found several tape cassettes of rehearsals for music, and they contained Gary's barbed comment from that first rehearsal. "I'll give you 3 guesses who loves you." But it's not the big song. It's this. Also, the music for the show was all on track and operated by the musical director, who merely pushed the button on the keyboard and made no attempt to accompany us or guide us from the pit. As a consequence, one did not feel supported in the slightest, and this gave way to another Downey rant during rehearsals. "We use this," alluding to the keyboard, "so the music is constant. If anything goes wrong, it's your fault, not this." He was South African. Ironically, on the matinee later in the run, Mr. Downey had recourse to eat his words, but more about that later. So while John blocked the dialogue, Gary set the routines under the stage, and it flowed fairly well. At lunchtime, everyone piled into the last post, Chesham's Wetherspoons, for a liquid lunch. This would normally not exactly be frowned upon, but not exactly the norm. But as history will show, this was part of the course for John and Gary. The infamous book reveals an horrendous drinking regime during rehearsals.
That's when I noticed that the drink was an issue. We'd arrive at 9 in the morning and Gary would go over to Sainsbury's directly opposite and pick up a bottle of vodka and a couple of bottles of Tango, and he would bring those over to the theatre. They would sit there at their desk right in front of the stage. The vodka would be in a bag under the table. John would chain smoke his way through his Dunhills and Gary would pour vodka under the table. They would go through to lunchtime and then they would take the entire cast, but not the crew, to the local pub. Usually John and Gary would have a bottle of wine between them, if not more, and they would never eat. And then they would do an afternoon's work. At 6 they'd go back to the pub. When the show opened, they would turn up half an hour or an hour before the matinee and stand in the bar. Go in and see the show, take drinks in with them, go to the pub after the show and give notes. Some of the younger cast were scared of them. They had high expectations and I quite like that, but there's an impatience, an aggression which comes with alcohol. John was pretty much drunk from morning till night, and so was Gary. There was inappropriate language in front of the children. It was very difficult to manage.
Little wonder then that John really didn't criticise me much in rehearsals, but tended to guide me quite gently. In the evenings, of course, we had the local kids join us for dance routines and setting the scenes that involved them. And so the sound of the clattering tap shoes took on elephantine proportions. My only company number on that first day was the reprise of Once in My Lifetime from Stop the World I Want to Get Off. Very straightforward on that first day and no real problems. John did, however, teach the kids the cruel realities of show business by lining them up to decide who was going to receive a line to say. He literally lined them all up on the front of the stage, and the one who could shout the loudest got the line. Brutal, but that's show business. When we came to set the Act 1 finale, I wisely chose to wear the long fur coat that Colin Day in Brighton had lent me. It was incredibly heavy, and as we had a chain to do in the finale, it seemed very wise to wear it. Gary couldn't resist trying it on and showing me how to move in it. As it turned out, I didn't end up using it for that scene anyway. The opening to Act 2 took place in Mother Goose's palace and included a roller skating routine for myself and Peter Quince to the title song from The Rink by Candour and Ebb, as both of us could just about roller skate, and I'd done my opening spot on the skates as well. The only routine that hadn't been set by the weekend was the mops routine for Royce, Peter and myself. And typical of Gary, he left it until the last thing on the Saturday afternoon after the run-through before setting it. John had asked for a run-through on the Saturday afternoon, and as I needed to get a feel for the costumes, I suggested that I attempt the run in costume. Now this was to have several consequences, but the main advantage was that it put me a step ahead before the tech and dress rehearsals. Gary had rather pig-headedly given that nearest dressing room to the stage the Shaboo. OK, she was the name, but a more down-to-earth person you couldn't hope to find, and years later when we worked together again at the Elgiva, she was only too pleased to share with the girls to minimise the logistics of my quick changes. But I was forced to do all 15 costume changes in the corridor near stage right, which then ran into difficulties with the fire exits, and I was doing them all by myself, with no help, as the producers had firmly said, we're not paying for a dresser. Rather stupid, given that the main character on whom the plot and show depended was rather dependent on getting back on stage in different outfits each time. And after all, it was John who had insisted that every entrance should afford a costume change. So there I was, putting cup hooks into the corridor notice board to hang my earrings on, laying costumes on chairs or hanging them from the ceiling where I could. I can't even remember where we put the wigs, probably on the floor. And all the costumes, wigs and accessories had to be transported safely back to the dressing room after every performance. But in those days, the show was the thing. It must have been the love of it somehow. I was literally dripping with perspiration within half an hour of doing that first run-through. Not that that's unusual on the first run until one has found the energy level and learnt to pace oneself accordingly. I did the entire first run-through in costume without assistance, and pretty bedraggled I must have looked by the end of it. Peter Quince very kindly went to John and said, "I think David could do with a bit of help," to which John repeated, "Well, we're not paying for a dresser," very adamantly. To this day, I don't know what he was trying to prove or achieve by denying a panto dame any assistance in the dame role of all dame roles. Ironically, the same was to happen the next time I played the role just 2 years later at Wakefield. It must be the curse of Mother Goose. To cap it all, at the end of that rehearsal, Gary chose that moment to set the aforementioned mop routine, when everyone was tired after a full-on run. Inevitably, tempers were frayed, and I accidentally caught Royce in the eye with the mop. I remember we wasted a lot of time arguing about which foot one steps off on for a march, Peter sticking to his guns and saying it was always left foot for marching, and Gary telling us to lead with the right. By the time we finished, we were grateful for the prospect of a day off. I was very lucky on that show that I was able to get home courtesy of Jodie and her mum on our days off, and back the next day, and of course Michael and I duly reciprocated when Michael was driving up. On the Sunday afternoon, I was watching a TV programme about John Inman, which included the famous washing line strip, which we were emulating in the boudoir scene. John had supplied the corselet with the padlocks and chains and the dressing gown it covered, and the washing line made out of actual rope. But I had to supply the washing for the line and some sort of covering to go over the ensemble so it looked like a nightdress. As a result, and through lack of guidance and planning, the thick rope bulked the costumes out, and it was obvious to everyone that the strip was concealed underneath, whereas the great John Inman made it look effortless, naturally, with lightweight silk washing on a thin cord wrapped around the waist and hips, handed to a stagehand in the wings, held taut and then whisked off once John had called out the tagline, "Hasn't it been a shocking day for drying?" As soon as the programme had finished, the phone rang and John's voice intoned, "Well, now we know how to do it." John had been thinking about a few things over the weekend, and it had been useful to him to see the costume run the day before. He strongly advised me to use one of my own skin-tight drag costumes for the transformation, and to wear as much padding as I could during the rest of the show up until the transformation, especially padding for the bum. I'd experimented with all sorts of makeup options to go from old age to young and glamorous within the space of a number, but given the time there was to change, there wasn't a lot we could do. We'd hit on that idea of the blacked-out tooth when Mother Goose is an older woman, and my working boots in those days were a lot flatter, so that helped as well. We had planned the transformation whereby I would jump behind the ground row representing the magic pool whilst wearing a bathing costume, disappear from sight and then dash off stage, remove the costume, quickly don the drag outfit, and then dash downstairs to the orchestra pit, where I would don wig, titivate makeup as much as I could with blusher and lipstick, remove the black tooth enamel with a toothbrush, and then at the given moment open the orchestra pit door and jump on the pit lift, which would then rise with myself on it to arrive in time to complete the transformation, with myself jumping up from a flight of steps on the lift. This, coupled with a slash curtain suddenly descending, completed the transformation. Well, that was the theory. And when we resumed work on the Monday morning for the technical rehearsals, it miraculously worked.
John used to get frustrated with follow spots not happening on time, mainly because he changed his mind. He'd yell "lime" very loudly, which is the old-fashioned term for follow spot, derived from the wording limelight. And of course the young technicians hadn't got a clue what lime meant, and he had a different training and was a lot older than us. It was a clash of cultures. There was one morning, recalls Roden, that John had called the technicians in early for a matinee at 1 o'clock. I got a phone call from the technical manager saying, "Can you come down here? We've got a bit of a problem." As I walked into the car park, I was greeted by John and Gary. They wanted to get in first. They said, "Your staff are morons. They're idiots. They can't do anything." Then, almost as an aside, John said, "Oh, and by the way, I may have smashed a plate." I went inside and my technical team were sitting in the scene dock smoking. I've never seen them so angry.
By this time, Joe, a lovely lad from the stage crew, and whom had assisted David Raven the previous year, offered to help with the costume changes. I gave a sigh of relief. The technical rehearsals were fairly uneventful and productive, with the superb crew at the Elgiva and John's tight direction and technical know-how ironing out any issues. The set was a simple one that adapted to all the main sets, and the main technical area being the transformation. There was still the issue of transporting all the costumes up and down the corridor every day, but at least I had Joe to assist, and bless him, it was a labour of love for him to help me. This is something I've been lucky enough to have for many pantos, not a specific dresser, but one who puts it on their show track, is on the ball and has their eyes fully on the show, and not on their mobile phone or daydreaming in the wings, which I have experienced in the last few years. During the week, David Roden invited me back to his house in Amersham with his partner Simon and John and Gary and Royce for a nighttime drink and chill, and the drink flowed liberally. I got the impression that John, Gary and David and Simon were all good friends and all was well. Interestingly, Royce did point out that he was actually older than myself, playing his mother. And so on to the dress rehearsal. These proved not as stress-free as one assumed. On the final dress rehearsal, we were a good half an hour into the show. I was on my third costume change, when John suddenly called a halt, unheard of in a final dress rehearsal, and told the cast that the energy level was so low that he was restarting the show from the top. Now, to my mind, this was just self-indulgent and unfeeling to a cast that had already given their all. I've never since experienced this, and do subscribe to the maxim that an under-par final dress rehearsal will pull through on opening night. It just happens, probably because by that stage the show needs an audience. Even John Newman from New Palm gave the note about lack of energy after the first dress rehearsal, and it invariably galvanised everyone into action for that final dress run. But on we went, and we had to go through the entire clattering opening chorus again. The tap dancing had not improved, and it wasn't so much 42nd Street as Downtown. Part 4. The show must go on. And so on to opening night. But it was the press night when everything kicked off. I've already mentioned that our MD, Jasper Beaupre, had virtually no control over the music and show once he pressed the button for the click track. The number of times one gazed down into the pit to see him gazing blankly back with no support to give, I did subsequently discover that he was apt to be a martyr of the weed. The volume for the keyboard and the sound system for the theatre were controlled from the enclosed sound box at the back of the theatre, and thereby came the pith of the matter. And here I must break off to explain a basic training in voice production. We as actors are taught to project our voice to the back of the most difficult and biggest auditorium in the country. It's a technique that we are taught, we hone, and it's what we fall back on. It's the complete cycle of breath, diaphragmatic control, and sensing the sound come back to you that gives you the knowledge that one is doing one's job correctly. The best theatres to play are the old-style horseshoe ones, where the sound just bounces back at you, but any of the old theatres can be played effectively with proper voice production. The problems occur playing modern stone-built auditoria where there is nothing to bounce off, the new Elgiva Theatre being a prime example. And then when you are faced with the sound system with radio mics and the balance between the band and the actors, the problems really kick in. This was the exact problem with the Elgiva. The sound desk was in an enclosed box, so the sound controller couldn't actually hear what the audience was hearing, and thus to be able to adjust the balance accordingly. We also had no proper fold-back speakers in the wings to hear what the audience could hear. Fold-back is essential as it's the only way you can hear that you are producing your voice correctly, hear what the audience is hearing. And so with none of this correctly in place at the Elgiva, we were all open to problems. And so, on the press night, John and Gary were constantly going up to the sound desk, turning the keyboard level up, and David Roden, the theatre manager, was then running up and turning it down. This constant battle apparently went on all night.
When the show opened, there were still a lot of residual technical issues that John wanted to address. During the press night, remembers Colette, he ran up from the auditorium to the control room, poked his head in and started asking for the music to be louder. It was already deafening, but he was going deaf, you see. Then I had David come up saying, "We're having complaints that it's too loud." I said, "Look, I've got John saying making it louder. You're telling me to make it quieter." So David said, "Do what I say and I'll deal with John."
But I was unaware of it all. All I could sense was that I was singing into a void, couldn't hear myself, pushed my voice far more than I should have done, and after all it was press night, and I was trying to give the best performance I could. After the show I spoke to John and voiced my concerns, and he actually told me that I was the only cast member he could actually hear. But the next morning I was in serious trouble. I was recently listening to an interview with Sheila Hancock where she talks about how scary it is to wake up in the morning and not know how your voice is going to be. Well, I experienced this phenomenon badly. My throat felt tired and I could tell the top end of my voice and falsetto just wasn't there. In recent years, I've learnt that if I can't do my Dame Hilda Brackett or Dame Edna Everage impressions, then I have to be careful as the voice is at risk of being strained. So on that Saturday morning, even after a vocal warm-up, I knew something was wrong. Added to which John and Gary had decreed 3 performances a day of the show every Saturday and Boxing Day, which to my mind was ludicrous. And I wasn't the only cast member to be affected. I just about got through the first performance, but then by the end of it I was seriously struggling to sing. We had the most wonderful company and stage manager who'd been brought in on the recommendation of Peter Quince. Malcolm McPhee had been in Please Sir and the Fen Street Gang and was an old stager. I had been paid the ultimate compliment by him during rehearsals. Malcolm had been watching a final rehearsal with John and Gary and remarked to myself, "Well, there's an old pro if ever I've seen one." A lovely compliment from one who'd had a career far more prominent than my own. But back to the problem of what was now apparent as vocal strain due to the problems with the sound on press night. Malcolm suggested our cutting the numbers that were most strenuous to sing to save what little voice was there, and I reluctantly agreed to do so for self-preservation. It made me feel as though I'd let the show down badly, particularly as I was the lead role. Of course, I tried everything possible, steaming my throat, inhaling hot lemon and honey, and tons of cough sweets that actually do little more than give one confidence. Nothing is going to cure vocal strain other than rest. Luckily, there was then a day off, so some degree of rest was in order, but the damage had been done and it was never on top form for the rest of the run. Just goes to show what a stupid move can do to wreck a performance. Indeed, Lucy Loomis, playing the fairy, was to suffer the same problem, and she too had to cut her tap number Fabulous Feet. But with the show's music monopolised by tap numbers, this was no bad thing. Eventually she was dubbed off stage by Emma, who played the Goose. Now, Lucy had a very sweet, gentle voice, and Emma was most definitely a show belter. So it came as quite a shock when Lucy opened her mouth one matinee to sing "When You Wish Upon a Star." When you wish Malcolm McPhee was a tower of strength throughout, giving us better gags when the ones in the script weren't getting the best result. He gave Royce an excellent routine with the audience that we'd never get away with today, and basically involved a pound of raw sausages each night being thrown into the audience. Malcolm at his best was proven a week later. David Roden, the theatre manager, had thrown John and Gary out of the theatre on press night in no uncertain terms, and John and Gary had returned to Brighton immediately, but they couldn't resist causing mischief.
A couple of weeks before the show opened, a scandal was narrowly averted. We had one boy in the show who was about 14. Gary had been working with this boy on his own, and I had a complaint from the mother. I don't know if anything happened, but I had to launch an official investigation. Tristan Collette remembers the incident well. My girlfriend was working there at the time, and I had to comfort a young lad who was changing under the stage. Gary, who was down there with him, made a pass at him. It put this boy off theatre for life. David spoke to the parents of the kid, and they were very cool about everything. They shouldn't have been. If I had been the parents, I would have let him have it. Gary was predatory. It was very unpleasant. Roden was in a difficult position, and John said, "How can you do this? We're your friends. You've known us for years." I said, "I'm really sorry. I'm manager of the theatre. I've had a complaint made against Gary. I have to investigate it." There was some talk of it being passed on to the police, but within a day, the complaint was withdrawn. I don't know why. I knew what Gary could be like, but I wouldn't have credited him with that. That was a major turning point in my relationship with them. I don't think they felt I was on their side.
I suspect it was largely Gary who fueled the fire. Both turned up at the theatre after a matinee and demanded a meeting with David and Malcolm. I since discovered that they were trying to sabotage my only means of help with costumes in the form of Joe, and insisting that they weren't paying for my dresser. Malcolm argued that Joe was helping me as part of his stage management duties and paid by the theatre. The argument went back and forth with John and Gary insisting that I was brought into the conversation, and Malcolm eloquently asked why they were hell-bent on ruining my performance, and told them there was no way that the lead performer was going to be summoned to their presence straight after a matinee. John had very kindly bought me up a new costume for the ballroom in the shape of a Christmas pudding. I had originally made the entrance into the ballroom as Dame Edna, in a dress I'd tarted up myself. Not a stunner, and I've since changed the outfit whenever I've done a Dame Edna entrance. And as I was experiencing vocal strain, the impersonation had to go too. A shame, as the press notices praised the lifelike impression. But the dress certainly packed a punch, especially as I walked on, got the laugh, and then lifted the voluminous crinoline to reveal two of the babes from the chorus, who then ran off with my cry, "Thanks for the lift, girls." I still own the same dress, but more about that later. Our musical director continued to be cause for concern. The backing tracks for the show were not easy to follow time-wise, and Jasper invariably just sat in the pit, not even watching the stage. We came to blows a few times with the duet "When You Smile," as the track didn't follow the score, and the drummer wasn't helping much either. It all came to a head one matinee, when we came to the finale of Act 1, and the reprise of "When You Smile." Now, whatever had happened to the keyboard, Jasper's programming, or whatever, when the 7-note intro struck up, the entire company suddenly realised within a split second that something was desperately wrong tempo-wise, and clicked into auto mode and did the entire routine at double tempo. At the post-mortem afterwards, Jasper gave us a vague apology which cut no ice with any of us, and it was Jodie who echoed Gary's comments regarding the keyboard. "This will always stay constant." How lucky we were to be possessed with perfect timing. The reviews for the show were universally good, and my own notices couldn't have been better. And on to the next major incident. A little later in the run, I forget what time of the week it was, but during the course of one evening performance, it was painfully clear that Royce was pissed on stage. And sadly, Royce had to carry the song sheet on which we all depended to change into our finale frocks. I've since heard that Malcolm was prepared to cut the song sheet at any time if Royce had got out of hand. But he appeared at the curtain call in an absolute mess. Shirt out of his trousers, dishevelled, and even just shrugged at the audience as he made his entrance. It made me so mad that one could be so disrespectful to the audience and personally let himself down. Of course, I since discovered that JNT was good friends with Royce's agent Beau from Marnie Gresham Agency in Brighton, whom I'd hitherto written to for representation and had been refused. In the middle of all this was an interesting TV appearance. Breakfast television was still in its infancy, but that particular year Channel 4 was still presenting The Big Breakfast with Liza Tarbuck and Johnny Vaughan. And on the lead up to Christmas, like an advent calendar, they had a daily 24 Shocking Dames Till Christmas, featuring a panto dame from various pantos across the country, opening the doors on the advent calendar on the programme at 7 a.m. in the morning from a freezing cold secret location in East London that was subsequently used for Big Brother or such like. Mark Barnes, the theatre manager, had written to the production team and suggested that as I was billed as the roller skating dame, I should be included in one of the 24, from a novelty value, I can only imagine. It was unpaid, but made useful footage for my showreel, and the experience was not to be sneezed at. So, on day whatever of the advent calendar, there I was at 3 a.m. in the morning, making up in my bedroom at the digs and keeping an eye on the Elgiva Theatre across the road for the complimentary taxi to take me to the secret location, which I think later became part of the Big Brother household or was certainly near it. It had been a wise decision to do my makeup earlier and work out exactly what I was going to say and stick to my guns. The whole thing was done and dusted very quickly at exactly 7 a.m. I'd picked the most colourful of the costumes, combined with the roller skates, of course. The crew had laid down a flooring outside to enable me to roller skate briefly, and try as they might, Liza Tarbuck and Johnny Vaughan were not going to talk over me for love nor money. I managed to give virtually everyone in the entire cast a mention, even though we only had Shabu as a name in the show. And then I was invited to just sit in the studio for the rest of the programme, which wasn't as easy as it may appear. The Big Breakfast was a crazy programme and relied on the studio audience being animated throughout. After just half an hour, my jaw was aching from just trying to smile all the time. Joe Brand was on the programme, and we exchanged a nice conversation in the final moments of the programme before getting changed and enjoying the complimentary breakfast. There wasn't much time to hang around, as I had the school's matinee at around 1 p.m. and needed to at least have an element of rest after my early start.
Johnny Mac back with us this morning. He's on camera.
Super hair.
Welcome to the show. It's Thursday, the 16th of December. I'm Johnny Vaughan. Good morning to you.
I'm Liza Tarbuck. Good morning to you. And once again, Johnny, to my great surprise, I feel in a panto mode.
Oh, no, you don't.
Oh, yes, I do.
Oh, no, you don't.
Oh, yes, I do.
Oh, no.
Do you know what, kids? We're looking for a man dressed as a funny woman. Can you see them anywhere? What do you mean?
What do you mean behind it?
What do they mean? What do they mean?
Where? There's no one behind
There he is.
There's not behind us.
No.
Do it for us. Oh, there! Oh!
I tell you
There we
something.
go, Dave!
On casters, you must be some sort of shocking dame.
24 Shocking Dames Till Christmas. In fact, we're welcoming today David Rumelle.
Hello.
It is Dave. I just said
Dave Rumelle, that's lovely. So where are you appearing, Dave?
Well, I am the roller skating dame, and I'm playing the dame of all dames this year, Mother Goose in Mother Goose
Mother Goose.
at the Elgiva Theatre, Chesham.
Okay.
Buckinghamshire.
Chesham, Buckinghamshire, that's on till January the 2nd.
Until January the 2nd.
That's
we've
quite a
opened
short
already.
run there, isn't
It's
it?
quite a short run, but we're
Yeah,
doing two
quality.
performances today.
Okay, so hurry while that one lasts. Most
Wow.
importantly, of course,
Yes.
what celebs you got in your pants on?
Well, of course, you've got me, and then you've got the lovely Shabu Kapoor, who viewers...
Geeta.
Geeta from EastEnders, of course.
How tall is Geeta?
Well, she comes up to about here on me.
Well, she would.
Then you've got Peter Quince from the new film Rogue Trader, and from children's television we have
Yeah, no.
Royce Hula from Playdays.
And also Royce Hula.
From Playdays, yes.
From Playdays, yes. Now, as is the tradition with all our Panto dames, we'd like you to open the door to our advent calendar. What day is it today? 16th. Thank you very much indeed. The 16th. Let's
over
open it
to
up,
you.
please.
Where are we?
There you are, look.
In what
This
is
one.
becoming a bit of compulsive viewing on
Who's
British
that?
television.
Oh.
It's Santa.
It's Santa Gale, ladies and gentlemen. Phil Gale.
That's really lovely.
And you can
Dave,
still download that advent calendar from our website if you want to enjoy all the delights of that
I'm
every
loving
day.
these cozies.
Here's what's still to come on this morning's show. Here we go.
And that was basically that. The show ran its course. I was able to get back for Christmas thanks to Jodie, and Mike and I duly reciprocated when he came up to visit me. The last night held a wonderful surprise. John and Gary came to the final performance and presented us all with cards and champagne, and a local radio presenter announced that the award for Best Dame, as voted by his listeners, had been awarded to myself. Considering it was one of my early pantomime experiences, I couldn't be happier. Excellent reviews, TV footage, and the award, and many, many happy memories with a lovely cast. Last nights are always bittersweet, but this was special, and I was so pleased it was videoed on the final performance as well as earlier in the run. All in all, it had been the most extraordinary experience. The cast were to meet up again around 6 months later when we were invited round to John and Gary's to watch the video, to much alcoholic accompaniment. I spoke intermittently to John and Gary over the following years, and Gary rang me about a proposition they were planning to present pantomime abroad, with us literally living in the venue in self-contained apartments, akin to our dressing rooms, which I must admit would have been interesting. I was totally unaware of how ill John was at the time, until the notorious book The Life and Times of John Nathan Turner was published years later. John rang me one Sunday and asked if I'd like a few bits and pieces of costume and props he'd been turning out. Michael and I met with him and Gary in Legends while watching the great Phil Starr, and it was such a shock to see John virtually looked orange. He was dying even then, and within a few months he had passed away. My dear friends John Cooper and John Griffiths, who'd been instrumental in getting me the job, rang me to tell me the news, and the funeral was standing room only at Woodvale Crematorium in Brighton. Dora Bryan and Carol Kay danced to John's finale, It's Not Where You Start, It's Where You Finish, with Dora's shoe flying off midway, and he was given a good send-off.
It was a really fitting end, says director Andrew Morgan. It brings tears to my eyes to think about it. It was such an emotional thing. The old vicar was camp as ourselves. The whole thing was just wonderful. John would have absolutely adored it. He was genuinely loved. I have nothing but good vibes when I think about him. It was very celebratory, agrees Jessica Martin. Not maudlin at all. Fabulous. And it struck me that what an honour it was for him to extend the hand of friendship to me. He always used to say, I want a really big finish, recalled Gary Downey. We always used to end our shows with, it's not where you start, it's where you finish. At the funeral, the vicar said, this is a song that John and Gary used in their shows. Most of you know the words, so if you want to sing along, the crowd of showbiz mourners needed no second bidding. As Ralph Wilson remembers, that awful bit where the coffin slowly slides into the distance and the curtains draw around it. Well, we were singing It's Not Where You Start, and Dora Bryan and Carol Kay actually tap danced down the aisle. It was amazing. People were clapping and cheering in the bloody funeral, says Graham Flynn. It was unbelievable. One of their shoes went off in the high kicking, chuckles Fiona Cumming, and there was a lot of laughter. As they were dancing, the curtains closed round the coffin. Gary said afterwards, I wondered if we could have pulled the curtains back again and given him an encore. I'll never forget those two old hoopers dancing last Sylvester McCoy. It was the funniest thing, and it kind of summed up his love for all that. Oh my God, they've upstaged John. But no, John would have loved it. Two old ladies up there, dancing away.
A couple of years later, in 2005, Gary rang me to ask if I'd like to buy some costumes from them, which actually turned out to be the majority of the Trelette costumes from Cinderella. I say buy, as he wasn't going to let me have them for nothing. Frugal to the last. It was rather sad that I later learned he'd given away the two beautiful dressing gowns I'd worn in Mother Goose to the local taxi driver who put on his annual adult panto with appalling standards of production, and in which I was to be involved for 4 years. Gary died of cancer soon after, and he and John's ashes are buried with John's mother's in the churchyard at Rottingdean, and that seemed to be that until the publication of the infamous book, The Life and Outrageous Times of JNT. I can only say thank heavens I didn't know half of what had been going on at the Elgiva during the run. But it had all been going on under my very nose. Looking back, it was very sad that two people who had given me such a boost to my pantomime career should have met such a sad ending at a relatively young age. It was very sad too that the pair of them weren't slightly more receptive to the needs of stage performers, they being predominantly TV producers. But I don't think anyone can ever forget that season at Chesham and my chance to play Mother Goose, the dame of all dames.
Smile away, each day, and laugh away your blues. Like old bricks and wire when it starts to fall. Live hard out now, although you're singing bubble. It's mine, there's still life. So really proud of playing. Let round my desire, tell us about the briar, and fly away, I'll give you 3 guesses who'll love you, right from the start. Not your mother, who will like you, baby, no, and not the kids back home. You know, I don't know, there's somebody so who needs you. Together, all apart. Let you learn me, we guesses, and not even two. To know that I'm the one who does brilliant. When you smile, I smile. Your smile likes my smile. So when I know nowhere to go, nothing is clearer. I see you bring down to this, you're like a mirror. We're all done. You smile more and see too. For a breath of my head, never than you. In the room of blue, isn't it? Where you like that great thing a shocking day for trying. Oh, I'm going to miss you terribly. Goodbye, Silla. And you won't need 3 guesses and not even 2 to know that you're the one. Sweet. Look at me! I'm beautiful! Oh, you know, if I'd known it was going to be this easy, I'd have taken the bath years ago. I told you I get nervous at the picture show. Here is where I want to go. Instead, I said I want to go round the river. And I do the river. You want to go around the river. You got to go round the river. I want to see the river. Around the river. You want to go around the river. You want to go round the river. Darling. Molly, anyone? Yeah. Oh, boys and girls, I'm so depressed. My nerves are getting on my nerves. Nobody loves me. It's true they don't. You know I hung my stocking up early for Santa this year. All I got back was a note that said, wash it. I parted with Mother Goose just for this. No matter what it may look like on the outside, and there's the poor, stupid old woman at heart. Oh, I shouldn't have listened to that Mrs. Vanity, and the golden eggs are starting to run out, and nobody loves me. What should I do? If only I had been so rude to that fairy.
Fate is hard. She brings you love to love. But before the heart, there is a
Thanks to fairy harmony and Scylla, her dear friend. Our pantomime has shown that love is still a cherished token. Now, to be quiet, I've just been told the theatre bar afternoon.
We hope you enjoyed the fun, the music and the slapstick. Oh, I've lost the rhyme and the fun. So, all of us go on to